She walked out of a wedding with 500 guests watching, and showed up at the door of a man who had nothing to offer her except the truth. A billionaire CEO, a runaway bride, a single father who never asked to be anyone's refuge. When Vanessa Hart abandoned the most talked-about wedding of the year and appeared on Landon Pierce's doorstep at midnight still wearing her dress, neither of them understood what they were starting. What followed wasn't a love story anyone would have written. It was messier than that, more painful, more real. If you've ever chosen the harder, truer thing over the safer lie, this one's for you. Hit like, drop your city in the comments, and follow this story all the way to the end. Part 1. The Woman at the Door. The knock came at 11:47 p.m. Landon Pierce knew the exact time because he'd been watching the clock for the past 20 minutes, waiting for the dryer to finish its last cycle so he could fold Maisie's clothes before he went to bed. That was his Thursday night. That was most of his nights, if he was being honest. Laundry, dishes, the low hum of the television he wasn't really watching, and the specific kind of quiet that settles over a house when a child is asleep and a grown man has run out of ways to fill his own hours. He almost didn't answer it. The neighborhood wasn't bad, but it wasn't the kind of place where people knocked on your door at midnight for good reasons. He set down the shirt he'd been folding, Maisie's favorite, the one with the faded sunflower print she refused to let him throw away, even though the collar was starting to fray, and walked to the front door with the particular wariness of a man who'd learned not to expect much from surprises. He looked through the peephole. For a full 3 seconds, he didn't move. Then he unlocked the door. Vanessa Hart was standing on his front porch in a wedding dress. Not a simple dress. Not something modest or understated, because nothing about Vanessa Hart's life had ever been modest or understated. The gown was the kind of thing that got photographed for magazine covers. Ivory silk, a fitted bodice, a skirt that pooled slightly at the hem like it had been designed to make the woman wearing it look like she belonged somewhere grander than a concrete porch in East Portland. There was a veil still pinned loosely into her dark hair, slightly askew, one side of it drifting over her shoulder. Her heels were in her hand. She was barefoot on his doorstep. Her eyes were dry. That was the first thing he noticed. No tears, no mascara tracked down her face, no redness around her nose or the particular puffy softness that came from crying. Vanessa Hart did not appear to have been crying. She appeared to have been running, not literally, but the kind of running you do in your chest, the kind that leaves you breathing a little too carefully because you're afraid if you stop controlling it, you might not be able to start again. "I didn't have anywhere else to go," she said. "That's not true. I had 100 places I could have gone. I didn't want any of them." Landon looked at her for a moment. Then he looked past her at the street. Empty, quiet. A single car parked 3 houses down that he didn't recognize but also didn't feel alarmed by. "You got here in bare feet?" "I took my heels off at the corner. The pavement was actually nicer." "Where's your car?" "4 blocks east. I needed to walk." He stepped back from the door. "Come inside," he said. He'd known Vanessa for 3 years, though known was probably too casual a word for whatever their relationship actually was. They'd met through her company's urban development initiative, Hartwell Capital's bid to fund a series of mixed-use community projects across 3 Oregon cities, and Landon had been the project coordinator brought in by the nonprofit that served as the initiative's community liaison. He was good at his job. He'd spent 8 years learning how to translate between the language of capital and the language of neighborhoods, between what investors wanted to hear and what communities actually needed, and he was one of the few people who could do that without losing something essential in the translation. Vanessa had noticed that about him within the first meeting. She'd also noticed that he was one of the only people in the room who wasn't performing for her. It became a thing between them. Not a romantic thing, or at least not something either of them had named tsots, but a thing. Lunches that started as working meetings and ran long. Phone calls that began about project logistics and drifted into actual conversation, a kind of mutual recognition that was hard to define and easy to feel. She trusted his judgment. He respected her intelligence without confusing it for infallibility. They were, in whatever specific and limited way their separate lives allowed, genuinely close. He also knew she was supposed to have gotten married tonight. He'd known about the wedding for 4 months. Preston Hale, venture capital, family money, Stanford, the full set. Vanessa had mentioned him the way she mentioned most things in her personal life. Briefly, with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to keep that part of herself small and transportable. Landon hadn't pushed. He'd met Preston once, at a Hartwell function, and formed no strong opinion of him except that the man had the particular quality of someone who'd been told he was exceptional so often that he'd stopped needing to verify it. He hadn't been invited to the wedding. That was fine. They didn't have that kind of relationship. Or they hadn't. Now Vanessa was standing in his living room in $4,000 worth of silk, looking at the pile of unfolded laundry on his couch, with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Sit down," he said. "I'll move that." "Don't move it on my account." "I'm moving it because I need somewhere to sit too." He gathered the clothes into the laundry basket and set it on the floor. "Do you want something to drink? I have water, orange juice, and I think there's a beer in the back of the fridge from 2 weeks ago." "Water's fine." He went to the kitchen. He took a glass from the cabinet and filled it at the tap and stood there for a moment with his hands on the counter, looking at the window above the sink. His reflection looked back at him. 32 years old, 3 years of single parenthood visible in the slight tension around his eyes, wearing a gray t-shirt with a small bleach stain near the hem. He brought the water back and sat in the armchair across from her. "The wedding," he said. "I didn't go through with it." "I gathered. I made it all the way to the ceremony." She was holding the glass in both hands, looking down at it. 500 people. His family, my board, journalists. I think there were at least 3 journalists who got invited under other pretenses. I was in the back waiting, and I could hear the string quartet, and I thought... She stopped, took a breath, tried again. "I thought about what I was about to do, and I realized I couldn't give you one true reason for it. Not one. I kept going through the list, and everything I came up with was either practical or it was about what the marriage would look like from the outside, and I thought, that can't be the whole answer. There has to be something real in here somewhere." "Was there?" She looked at him then. "No." The quiet came back. Outside, a car passed. The dryer clicked off somewhere down the hall. "He's going to be furious," Landon said. "He already is. He texted me 17 times. His mother called me 4 times. My publicist called me 6 times, and I haven't called her back yet, which means she's probably already in damage control mode, and by tomorrow morning, this is going to be a thing." A thing? A massive thing. She said it without drama. Just the flat acknowledgement of a woman who had spent a decade living at the intersection of wealth and visibility and knew exactly how those forces operated. "Someone photographed me leaving the venue. I saw the flash. So there are going to be pictures, and there are going to be stories, and I needed to be somewhere that wasn't all of that before any of it starts." "Why here?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Because you don't want anything from me," she said. "Because you never have. Because every other place I could have gone tonight, there would have been an agenda. Someone who wants to help me but also wants to be seen helping me. Someone who wants the story. Someone who has an opinion about Preston or the company or what I should have done differently." She set the glass down on his coffee table. "You're not going to do any of that." "I might have opinions." "You might, but you'll keep them until I ask. And even then you'll only say the thing that's actually true instead of the thing you think I need to hear." She paused. "That's rarer than it sounds." Landon didn't answer that. He looked at the glass on his coffee table, then at the faint outline of the city through the window, then back at her. "The couch pulls out," he said. "I'll get you some sheets." Maisie Pierce discovered the woman on the pull-out couch at 6:23 a.m. This was earlier than Landon had anticipated, though it shouldn't have been. Maisie had 2 speeds on weekend mornings, and both of them involved being awake before 7. He was still in the foggy first minutes of consciousness when he heard her voice from the living room, high and clear, and carrying the absolute absence of self-consciousness that belonged exclusively to 7-year-olds. "Why are you wearing a princess dress?" He was out of bed before he fully registered that he was moving. He came down the hallway to find Maisie standing at the foot of the pull-out couch in her pajamas, the ones with the small yellow stars, hands clasped behind her back, studying Vanessa with the focused, unblinking attention of a child who had decided that this situation was interesting and required full investigation. Vanessa was sitting up on the couch, hair loose and slightly tangled, the veil long since removed and placed carefully over the arm of the nearest chair. In the early morning light, without the context of the previous night, the dress looked different, less ceremonial, more simply strange, like a theater costume in the wrong setting. "I was at a fancy party last night," Vanessa said. She sounded less thrown than Landon would have expected. She looked at Maisie with a directness that matched the girl's own. "What kind of fancy party?" "The kind where everything is very expensive and nobody laughs very much." Maisie considered this. "That sounds bad." "It wasn't great." "I'm Maisie." "I know, your dad talks about you." Maisie looked back at Landon with an expression that combined the satisfaction of confirmed suspicion with the mild reproach of someone who had not been consulted. "You didn't tell me." "I didn't know she was coming," Landon said. He came fully into the room. "Maisie, this is Vanessa. She's a friend of mine from work. She needed a place to stay last night. Can she have breakfast with us?" "That's up to Vanessa." Maisie turned back to Vanessa. "Do you like pancakes?" Vanessa looked at the girl for a moment with an expression Landon had never seen on her face before. Something open and slightly unguarded, like a door someone had been keeping shut for a very long time, had been nudged accidentally ajar. "I love pancakes," she said. "Do you know how to make them?" "I haven't in a while. I used to, She stopped for just a fraction of a second. "Someone taught me when I was about your age." "Dads are better if someone else makes them," Maisie confided in a loud whisper. Maisie. "What? It's true, yours get uneven." Vanessa's mouth curved. Not a smile exactly, but something close to the real thing. Involuntary, amused, unperformed. "I make them pretty even." "Okay," said Maisie, and turned and walked toward the kitchen with the absolute certainty of someone whose agenda had been settled. Landon looked at Vanessa. Vanessa looked at Landon. "You don't have to," he said. "I want to," she said, and the simple directness of it, the absence of qualification, was somehow more striking than anything she'd said the night before. She found the mixing bowl in the third cabinet she checked, the flour in the pantry beside a bag of rice and 2 cans of black beans, the baking powder in the small basket on the second shelf. Maisie sat on the counter. Landon started to say something about that, and then didn't, because Maisie was already sitting there with her elbows on her knees, watching with the dedicated attention she gave to anything she'd decided was worth watching. Vanessa moved through the kitchen with the slightly careful quality of someone relearning a language they'd spoken fluently once, and then set aside for too long. She checked the back of the flour bag for the ratio. She found a whisk in the drawer Maisie pointed her toward. She cracked 2 eggs against the side of the bowl, and for a moment her hands had the automatic ease of genuine memory. Not practiced, just remembered. Landon stood in the kitchen doorway with his coffee cup and watched the two of them, his daughter explaining the importance of blueberries, Vanessa listening with the genuine attention of someone who was not accustomed to being required to listen and was finding it, to her evident surprise, a relief. The ordinary kitchen sounds, the scrape of the whisk, the sizzle of butter in the pan, Maisie dropping a blueberry on the floor, and then the small negotiation about whether the 5-second rule was operational, filling the space where last night's wait had been. He thought, "This is the strangest morning of my adult life." He also thought, "She looks more like herself right now than she ever does at work." He didn't say either of those things. He drank his coffee and watched the pancakes take shape. The first photograph appeared online at 8:14 a.m. Landon found it because his phone had been buzzing on the bathroom counter while he was in the shower, and by the time he picked it up, he had 11 text messages, 4 from his coworker Derek, 3 from his friend Marcus, 2 from a number he didn't recognize, and 1 each from his mother and his sister, both of which said some variation of "call me now." He sat on the edge of his bed with a towel around his waist and looked at what Derek had sent him. The picture was grainy and taken from a distance, through what looked like a car window or a bush, the quality of something captured quickly and not carefully. But it was clear enough. The front walk of his house, the porch light, and Vanessa Hart in her wedding dress, standing in the open doorway, looking back over her shoulder at something off-frame. The caption on the gossip site where it had been posted read, "Runaway billionaire bride, where did she go?" The article beneath it was 4 paragraphs of aggressively under-factual speculation that included the phrase "mystery man" twice. He put the phone face down on the bed and sat there for a moment. Then he put on clothes and went back to the kitchen. Vanessa and Maisie were at the table. Maisie was talking about something that had happened at school involving a hamster named Gerald and the disputed ownership of a purple crayon. Vanessa was listening and eating a pancake, and the ease of it, the simple, unperformed normalcy, was almost jarring against the thing he was holding in his pocket. "Maisie," he said, "can you go get dressed for me? We're going to go to the park this morning." Maisie registered the tone. Children were better at that than most adults gave them credit for, and slid off her chair without argument. She paused long enough to take one more bite of her pancake, then disappeared down the hallway. Landon sat down across from Vanessa and turned his phone over and slid it across the table. She looked at the screen. Her expression didn't change much. That was one of the things about Vanessa Hart. She'd learned somewhere along the way to keep most of her reactions internal, to process before she displayed. He'd always assumed it was something corporate culture had trained into her, but sitting across from her now, he thought maybe it was older than that. "How many?" she asked. "I don't know yet. That's from 40 minutes ago. There are probably more by now." She picked up the phone and scrolled, put it back down. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have thought about this when I came here. I was—" She stopped, started again. "I wasn't thinking clearly. I wasn't thinking about what it would cost you. You needed somewhere to go. There are hotels, Landon. You didn't want a hotel. That doesn't make it okay to drop this on your front lawn." He looked at her across the table. The morning light was coming through the window over the sink, the same window he'd looked through last night, and it caught the small gold earrings she was still wearing from the night before, the only piece of ceremony she hadn't removed. "It's already done," he said. "We can deal with it. They're going to say you were why I left the wedding." "Were you?" She met his eyes, held them. "Not the way they'll mean it." He nodded once. That was enough for now. "I need to call my publicist," Vanessa said, "and I need to talk to my board before they hear about this from someone else. And I need to— There are 30 things I need to do in the next 2 hours." She said it with the flat efficiency of someone making a list rather than panicking, but he could hear the effort underneath it. The particular tension of a person holding multiple very heavy things at once and refusing to put any of them down. "Use my phone if you need to. Your number's probably already being watched. I have a secondary line." She was already standing. Then she stopped, looked back at the table, at the half-eaten pancakes, at the 2 glasses of orange juice, at the chair where Maisie had been sitting 20 minutes ago talking about Gerald the hamster with the absolute untroubled certainty of a child who found the world reliably interesting. Something moved across her face. He couldn't name it exactly. Loss was too simple. Longing was too dramatic. It was something quieter than either. The expression of a person who had, for approximately 40 minutes, forgotten what was waiting for them outside and was now remembering. "Thank you," she said. "For last night, for this morning. You made the pancakes. You opened the door." He didn't have an answer for that. She went to make her calls, and he started clearing the breakfast dishes, and outside the street was already beginning to fill with the ordinary sounds of a Saturday morning. A neighbor's lawnmower, someone's dog, a car reversing out of a driveway. Sounds that belonged to a world that didn't yet know it was paying attention to this house. It would know soon enough. The swarm arrived by noon, not all at once. It built the way these things built, which was to say gradually and then with the sudden speed of something that had been gathering pressure for hours, finally finding a seam. By 10 o'clock, there was a single van parked at the end of the block with a camera mounted on a tripod that was pointed at his house. By 11, there were 2 vans and a woman in a blazer standing on the sidewalk speaking into a microphone with his house visible in the background. By noon, the block had 4 separate vehicles with press credentials visible in the windows, 3 people with phones on selfie sticks, and 1 man with a telephoto lens who had apparently decided that the strip of sidewalk directly across the street from Landon's house was public property and therefore a valid professional workspace. He'd called Marcus by then, his oldest friend, the one person who could be trusted to arrive quickly and without drama. and Marcus had come over and was now sitting in the kitchen eating the last pancakes with Maisie while Landon stood at the living room window and watched the street. Vanessa was on the phone. She'd been on the phone for the better part of 2 hours, cycling through calls with the controlled efficiency of a general managing multiple fronts. She'd changed out of the wedding dress. Landon had found a pair of his sister's sweatpants that had been left here 6 months ago and a clean t-shirt. And the transformation was jarring in the opposite direction from this morning. The CEO was back. The sharpness behind her eyes had reorganized from the soft, open quality of the kitchen into something harder and more deliberate. He overheard enough to understand the shape of what she was managing. The board was already asking questions. 3 of them had called her directly, not through her assistant directly, which she'd told him was unusual enough to be significant. Preston Hale had released a brief statement through his family's PR firm that was carefully worded but unmistakably positioned to place the fault for the previous night's events in Vanessa's general direction. The statement didn't mention Landon by name, but it used the phrase circumstances that came to light in a way that was designed to imply without confirming. By 1 p.m., Landon's name was on 3 separate gossip sites. By 2 p.m., someone had found his LinkedIn and screenshotted his job title and the Hartwell Capital connection, and the headline that was circulating read, "CEO's Runaway Wedding. Was the mystery man already on her payroll?" He sat in his kitchen and read that headline and thought, well, there it is. You should probably not be here when they decide to knock, he told Vanessa. It was mid-afternoon. Maisie was in her room, doors closed, ostensibly doing the drawing she'd been planning since breakfast. Marcus had gone home after extracting a promise from Landon that he would call if anything escalated. The street outside was still occupied. Vanessa was sitting at his kitchen table with her phone and a legal pad. She'd found the legal pad in his junk drawer and had been making lists since lunch with the focused, slightly compulsive energy of someone who controlled things by organizing them. "I know," she said. "I'm trying to figure out where." "Can't go back to your place?" "There are 6 people outside my building. My doorman texted me." "Hotel?" "Which one?" "They've probably already called around." She set down her pen. "This is what it does? This is how it works. It colonizes your options until the only ones left are the ones that generate more story." Landon thought about that. He thought about Maisie in her room, drawing her pictures, unaware of the vans on the street or the headlines on the internet, or the particular way that the life her father had quietly and carefully built around her was in the process of becoming public property. "My sister lives in Beaverton," he said. "She's got a spare room and she doesn't owe anything to anyone in the press." Vanessa looked at him. "You'd call in that favor for me?" "It's not a favor. She likes a good mess." He paused. "That's not entirely a compliment, but in this context it probably works in your favor." The smallest version of a real smile appeared and disappeared on Vanessa's face. "Let me think about it." She looked down at the legal pad, looked back up. "Can I ask you something?" "Yeah?" "What did you think?" she asked. "When you saw me at the door last night, what was the first thing you actually thought?" He was quiet for a moment. The honest answer was complicated, and he turned it over a few times before he decided that she'd asked because she wanted the real one. "I thought you looked terrified," he said, "and I thought you were working very hard not to show it." She considered that. Nodded once, slowly, the way she did when she was filing something away. "I was," she said. "I know." She looked at her legal pad again, drew a line through something, wrote something else. "For what it's worth," he said, "you made the right call." She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was quieter than before. Not softer exactly, but stripped of some of the management she'd been applying to it all day. "I know," she said. "I just don't know yet what it costs." Neither did he. He looked at the window, at the street beyond it, at the van still parked at the corner with its camera still pointed at his house. He thought, whatever it is, we'll find out together. He didn't say that. It was too much for the middle of the day. But he thought it. By evening, Maisie knew something was happening. She didn't ask directly. She was 7, not oblivious, but she watched things with the careful attention she'd developed early, the way children do when they've learned that adults sometimes have entire conversations in the spaces between the words they say. She watched her father stand at the window too many times. She watched Vanessa on the phone. She watched the way the two of them talked to each other. Not like her dad talked to people from work, not like the careful, performed quality of adult strangers trying to be polite. She watched them the way she watched things she couldn't name yet, but knew were different. At dinner, Landon had made pasta, simple, from the things he had in the cabinet. She was quiet for longer than usual. Then she looked at Vanessa across the table. "Are you in trouble?" she asked. Vanessa stopped chewing, looked at the girl, set down her fork. "A little bit," she said.
The honest answer is a little bit. Maisie nodded, processing this. "Is my dad in trouble?" "Not if I can help it." Maisie looked at her father. "You should be careful," she told him, with the simple gravity of someone delivering information they considered very important. "I'm always careful," Landon said. Maisie's expression communicated very clearly that she did not entirely accept this characterization. Vanessa looked at the girl for a long moment, and then looked at Landon, and whatever was in her face was not something she tried to control or contain. It was just there, the unguarded thing again, wider open than before. He looked away first, back at his plate. The pasta needed more salt. He got up to get it.
He drove Vanessa to his sister's house at 9 p.m. He took the back streets, the ones that didn't have cameras on every corner, the route he used when he wanted to get somewhere without being seen. Something he'd never had reason to need before tonight. Maisie was in the back seat with her seatbelt on, half asleep before they'd made it 4 blocks, her head tilted against the window. He and Vanessa didn't talk much on the drive. There wasn't much left to say that wouldn't be better said later, when they both had more room around them. The city was quiet at this hour, the streets lit orange and blue, the specific nighttime version of Portland passing outside the windows. At one point, she said, "I keep thinking about what tomorrow looks like." "Messy," he said. "That's one word for it." "It's the right one." She looked out the window for a moment. "I'm not sorry I came to your door. I'm not sorry I opened it." The city moved past. Maisie breathed softly in the back seat. The radio was off. He dropped Vanessa at his sister's, Kara, who answered the door in a bathrobe, and looked between the two of them with the expression of someone who had questions that would absolutely be asked later, and drove home on the back streets again, the same route in reverse. He got Maisie out of the car asleep, her head against his shoulder, and carried her inside and put her in bed without waking her. He stood in her doorway for a moment afterward, looking at the sunflower shirt hung over her desk chair where she'd left it, at the drawings tacked to her wall, at the small particular shape of his daughter in the dark. Then he went to bed. He lay there for a long time, not sleeping, looking at the ceiling while the city settled into its late quiet outside his window. Somewhere on the internet, his face was probably attached to a story that would describe him in terms he hadn't chosen. Somewhere, a board of directors was having conversations about Vanessa Hart that she wouldn't fully learn about until Monday. Somewhere, Preston Hale was very angry at someone, at Vanessa maybe, but also almost certainly at him. All of that was tomorrow. Tonight there was just the ceiling and the quiet and the strange, specific weight of a day that had changed something in a way he couldn't yet measure. He thought about Vanessa standing in his kitchen that morning, hands automatic in the act of making something simple. He thought about Maisie on the counter, watching with those serious eyes. He thought about the expression on Vanessa's face when she looked at the table afterward, the one he hadn't been able to name. He thought, she's never going to be able to unknow this house. He thought, neither am I. He closed his eyes. Sleep took a while to come, but it came. Outside, the last of the press vans was still at the corner, its camera patient and unblinking in the dark. You said part 2, Louis. Viết 4.000 đến 4.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện, và hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Part 2. Lưu ý. Viết 4.000 đến 4.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện, và hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới, liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc.
Kể theo ngôi thứ ba, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man, nhân vật không hoàn hảo, hội thoại tự nhiên, tránh ngôn ngữ văn chương sáo rơi và cụm từ AI điển hình. Viết như nhà văn chuyên nghiệp, không như AI cố gắng nghe sang. Có yếu tố con người cầm miêu tả qua mượt mà và hoàn hảo, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau, câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document. Chỉ dẫn bắt buộc không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyện. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí. Không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật. Không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Show More 1715. Claude responded, Part 2, The Cost of Being Seen. Part 2, The Cost of Being Seen. The story was everywhere by Sunday morning. Not the true version. There wasn't a true version in circulation, and there probably wouldn't be for a while because the true version didn't have enough edges to it. The true version was a woman who had walked away from the wrong life and needed a quiet place to land, and that wasn't a story anyone could sell. What they sold instead was the version with more friction. The CEO, the canceled wedding, the man she'd allegedly been seen in secret, the house she'd run to in the middle of the night. Every outlet had a slightly different configuration of the same 4 facts, arranged to imply slightly different conclusions, and by Sunday afternoon the cumulative weight of it had its own momentum. Landon read about himself over coffee. That was a strange thing, reading your own name in a story you hadn't agreed to be part of, seeing yourself described in the flat declarative sentences of gossip journalism, your job title, and your address, and the single detail someone had dug up about his divorce 3 years ago, all assembled into a portrait that was technically accurate and fundamentally wrong. The piece on the site with the most traffic described him as Hartwell Capital's project coordinator and rumored confidant, which he supposed was the most diplomatic version of what they were implying. Others were less diplomatic. His phone had 47 notifications. He put it face down again and finished his coffee. Maisie came out at 7:30 wanting waffles, and he made waffles, and for 40 minutes the morning was just the morning. The sound of the waffle iron, Maisie's detailed report on a dream she'd had involving a talking elephant and a dispute over a library book, the ordinary texture of a Sunday that had nothing to do with press vans or gossip sites or the 47 notifications he was not reading. Then Maisie said, with her mouth still half full, "Is Vanessa coming back today?" Landon turned the waffle iron. "I don't know. Maybe." "I hope so." She swallowed. "She listens. Like actually listens, not like when grown-ups listen, but they're also thinking about something else." He looked at his daughter. "You can tell the difference?" Maisie gave him the look she reserved for questions she considered obvious. "Everybody can tell the difference, Dad." He turned back to the waffle iron and thought about that for a moment. Vanessa called at 9. She was at his sister's house, had been up since 5:30, had already spoken to her lawyer and 2 members of her board and her personal assistant and a crisis communications consultant she'd worked with before. She sounded the way she always sounded when she was managing something complicated, controlled, efficient, all the moving pieces visible and tracked. But he'd learned over 3 years to hear the thing underneath that register, and what was underneath it this morning was exhaustion. Not the tiredness of too little sleep, though that too. The deeper kind. "Preston issued a second statement," she said. "I saw." "Then you saw the part about professional entanglements." "Yeah." He had seen that. The phrase had been designed to land the way it landed, and it had landed. "How are your board responding?" "Divided." Which is the worst possible configuration. If they were unified against me, I could fight one thing. Divided means every conversation is its own negotiation. She paused. "Richard Cho called me this morning, off the record." Richard Cho was Hartwell Capital's chairman. Landon had met him twice, a compact, precise man in his mid-60s who had the quality of someone who made decisions slowly and never unmade them. What did he say? That the board is concerned about optics, that there are going to be questions about my judgment, that some members feel the situation warrants a formal review of my leadership. She delivered each sentence like she was reading from a document. He also said, and I'm quoting,
The association with the Pierce situation is the part that concerns people most. Landon was quiet for a moment. He called it the Pierce situation. He did. To your face. To my ear. I was on the phone. A beat. I told him I understood his concerns and that I would address them at the board meeting Thursday. Another beat. Then I hung up and sat in your sister's guest bedroom for about 10 minutes, not doing anything. He thought about her doing that, sitting in Kara's spare room with its mismatched furniture and the watercolor print Kara had bought at a street fair 3 years ago, phone in her lap, 10 minutes of just sitting. For Vanessa, 10 minutes of just sitting was the equivalent of a minor collapse. Are you okay? He asked. I'm fine. That's not what I asked. The line was quiet for a moment. No, she said, and the single syllable had none of the management in it. Not entirely, but I will be. I just need to figure out the next move. What's the next move? I have an idea, she said. I want to talk to you about it in person, tonight if possible. Tonight works, he said. Come for dinner. Maisie's already asked about you. Another pause, this one shorter, with a different quality. Okay, Vanessa said. I'll be there at 6. She arrived at 5:58. Landon noticed that the 2-minute earliness, which from Vanessa meant she'd been parked around the corner for a few minutes, rather than arrive exactly on time or late. He wasn't sure what to make of it, so he made nothing of it and opened the door before she could knock. She looked better than she had Sunday morning and worse than she looked on any ordinary workday. The dark circles under her eyes were doing their best against whatever she'd applied to address them. She was dressed simply. Dark jeans, a gray blazer, the studied casualness of someone who had made a deliberate choice about what to signal. She had a paper bag from the bakery 2 blocks from his house, which meant she'd walked, which meant she'd probably gone around the block twice first to check for cameras. I brought cookies, she said. The ones Maisie liked that time at the office. The snickerdoodles. Is that what they're called? I just pointed. Maisie appeared from the hallway at the sound of a voice, assessed the situation in under 2 seconds, identified the paper bag, and arrived at the door with a speed that Landon privately found both impressive and alarming. Are those snickerdoodles? Allegedly, Vanessa said. Can I have one before dinner? That, said Vanessa, is entirely your father's jurisdiction. Maisie turned to Landon with the full force of her persuasive apparatus directed at him. He lasted about 4 seconds. One? He said. Small one. He'd made chicken and roasted vegetables, the dinner he made when he wanted to cook something real without it becoming a project. Maisie talked through most of it, filling the space with the effortless commentary she provided on a rotating basis. The ongoing situation with Gerald the hamster, a disagreement about kickball that had apparently involved some light diplomatic incident, a book about deep-sea creatures she'd gotten from the library that she recommended to Vanessa with the conviction of someone whose taste was beyond question. Vanessa asked questions, real ones, the kind that tracked the previous answer instead of waiting for a pause to insert the next polite inquiry. Landon watched her do it and thought about what Maisie had said that morning. Like actually listens. After dinner, after Maisie had been settled with her book and the promise of one more snickerdoodle, Landon and Vanessa sat at the kitchen table with the remains of the coffee he'd made, and she told him the idea. I want to offer you a position at Hartwell, she said. He looked at her. Not a token position, a real one. Director of Community Development Initiatives. It's a role I've been meaning to create for 8 months and have been using lack of time as an excuse not to move on. You're the most qualified person I know for it, which isn't sentiment, it's just accurate. She held his gaze. You would have actual authority over the community portfolio, real budget, a team, the kind of work you've been doing piecemeal for other organizations you'd be able to do with actual resources behind it. He was quiet for a moment, turned his coffee cup in a small circle. You know what this looks like, he said. I know exactly what it looks like. That's part of why I'm telling you in person instead of through HR. She didn't look away. The story is already out there, Landon. We can't control what it says, but I can control whether the thing it's about is real or not. And the offer is real. It's not a management strategy. It's not me trying to create a narrative. It's me asking someone I trust to take a job they're good at. Your board is already worried about your judgment. My board's concern about my judgment is a conversation I'm going to have Thursday. That's separate. It's not separate. They're going to see this as confirming whatever story they've already decided is true. Maybe. She said it without flinching, but the alternative is I let external pressure make a decision about my company's staffing. And if I start doing that, I might as well hand them my resignation now, because a CEO who can't make personnel decisions without checking the press first isn't a CEO worth keeping. He looked at her. There was a version of this offer that was strategic, and he could see that version, could trace the logic of it clearly. But sitting across from her now, in his kitchen, with the coffee getting cold between them, he couldn't find any dishonesty in her face. What he found instead was the thing he'd always valued about her. She meant what she said, and she knew the cost of it, and she was saying it anyway. I need to think about it, he said. I know, take the week. If I take it, there's going to be a story. There's already a story. At least this one has a true version. He nodded slowly. Outside, the street was quiet. No vans tonight, or maybe they'd moved on to something fresher. The light above the kitchen table made the room feel smaller than it was, warmer, contained. Thank you, he said, for asking me directly instead of through someone else. That's the only way I know how to do things that matter, she said. He believed her. That was the problem, and the point of her. He almost always believed her, and she was almost always worth believing. He called her on Wednesday. The week had been its own specific kind of difficult. He'd returned to his existing job on Monday, a nonprofit with good intentions and permanently inadequate funding, the kind of organization that ran on the energy of people who cared too much, and found that his colleagues had, to varying degrees, read the stories. Most of them were decent about it. A few were the particular kind of careful that was itself a form of intrusion, the exaggerated normalcy of people trying very hard not to stare. His supervisor, a quiet man named Frank, who had been doing community development work for 30 years and had the weathered patience that came with it, had called him into his office Monday afternoon and closed the door. "You doing okay?" Frank had asked. "More or less. Your name's in a lot of places." "Yeah." Frank had looked at him over his reading glasses and the way he looked at things he was deciding how to handle. "The board here got some calls." "Nothing formal, just calls." Landon had sat with that. "About me. About the association. About whether it creates complications for our relationship with Hartwell Capital." Frank had paused. "I want you to know that I told them it was none of our business, and that you're one of the best people we've got. I also want you to know that not everyone on the board agreed with me. I appreciate the honesty. I always figure people would rather know." Frank had picked up his pen. "Just keep your head down this week. Let it settle." He'd kept his head down. It hadn't entirely settled. By Wednesday, he'd read the offer letter 3 times and made 4 separate lists of reasons to take it and reasons not to. The lists kept coming out even, which was its own kind of answer. When a decision can't be argued into clarity, sometimes what it's waiting for is a simpler question. He called Vanessa on Wednesday evening after Maisie was in bed. "I'll take it," he said. A pause on the line. Not surprised, she didn't sound surprised. More like she'd been holding something still while she waited, and now let it go. "Okay," she said. "I want a fair contract. Standard terms, nothing that looks constructed. Already drafted. My HR director has had it ready since Monday. She thinks I should have offered you the role 6 months ago, for what it's worth. She might be right. She usually is." Another pause, this one shorter. "Landon, this is a good decision. Ask me again in a month." "I will," she said. "I'll definitely will." He started the following Monday. His office was on the 14th floor of Hartwell's main building. Glass walls, a view of the river, the particular quality of light that came through floor-to-ceiling windows on a clear morning. It was more space than he was used to. He spent the first 2 hours arranging it in a way that felt functional rather than ornamental, moving the desk so his back wasn't to the door, finding somewhere useful to put the whiteboard, getting rid of the decorative items someone had placed on the shelves as if preparing the room for a photograph. His new team was 4 people: a data analyst named Priya, who had been with Hartwell for 3 years and had clearly been waiting for someone to actually use the data she'd been collecting. A project manager named Dion, who was 26 and sharp, and had the quality of someone who didn't waste effort but didn't cut corners. A community liaison named Sophie, who'd come from the nonprofit sector and had the particular skills that came from having worked on both sides of the capital to community translation. And an assistant named Raj, who had been supporting the department in its previous, less resourced incarnation and knew where everything was and who to call for anything. He had direct reports, a budget with actual numbers in it, a portfolio of 12 active community projects in 3 cities. Real work, the kind he'd been trying to do with inadequate tools for 8 years. He should have felt good about that. And part of him did. The other part of him was watching the way people in the hallways looked at him, or the specific way they tried not to, and cataloging the conversations that stopped slightly too quickly when he passed, and understanding that whatever he built in this role, he was going to have to build while standing in a story he hadn't written. Vanessa stopped by his office at 4 p.m. on his first day. She didn't knock, or rather, she knocked on the open door frame twice as a formality and came in before he could respond. She looked at the rearranged furniture, at the whiteboard he'd already filled with project notes, at the stack of files Priya had brought him that morning. "You moved the desk," she said. "I couldn't work facing a wall." "I told facilities it was fine the other way." "It wasn't fine the other way." She looked at the whiteboard, read some of it. "You're already into the Cascade District project." Priya walked me through it this morning. The community engagement data's been sitting in a folder for 6 months. Nobody's been using it. "I know, that's why you're here." She looked at the files, then at him. "How was the first day?" Not a question, a check-in, the kind she did when she actually wanted an answer. "Fine," he said. Then, more honestly, "People are watching." "People are always watching. You'll stop noticing it." "Did you?" She considered this. "I got better at deciding what I cared about." She moved toward the door. "There's a board meeting Thursday. I want you to present the community portfolio overview." He looked at her. "The board meeting where they're reviewing your leadership?" "Yes." "You want me to present at that meeting?" "I want them to see exactly what this department is doing and who's running it." She said it without blinking. "Is that a problem?" He thought about it for a moment. About the calculation she was making, the boldness or the recklessness of it, and how little distance there was between those two things when you were the one taking the risk. "No," he said, "it's not a problem." "Good. Priya can help you pull the deck together." She was already half out the door. "And move the desk back." "I'm not moving the desk back." She didn't answer that. He heard her heels on the hallway floor moving away, and then the particular quality of silence that followed Vanessa Hart when she left a room. He turned back to the whiteboard. Thursday's board meeting lasted 4 hours. Landon presented for 22 minutes. He kept it clean and specific. Community engagement numbers, project status, measurable outcomes against the portfolio benchmarks, 3 forward recommendations with clear cost-benefit analysis. He knew the room well enough to know that the presentation itself wasn't the whole point. The point was standing in the room and not apologizing for it, showing the work without the performance of justification, letting the numbers and the plan carry whatever weight they could carry. Afterward, Richard Cho stopped him in the hallway. The older man was shorter than Landon remembered, or perhaps just seemed smaller without a conference table to anchor him. He looked at Landon for a moment with the assessing quality of someone taking an accurate measurement. "Good presentation," Cho said. "Thank you." "You know this position is complicated." "I know my position is solid," Landon said. "The rest is external." Cho studied him, then nodded once, the minimal nod of a man giving credit for something he hadn't anticipated and wasn't going to elaborate on. He walked away down the hall. Landon stood there for a moment, then went back to his office. Vanessa found him there an hour later. She came in and sat in the chair across from his desk, the chair she hadn't sat in before, and looked at him with an expression that was carefully assembled. "The board voted," she said. "No formal review of my leadership. They want a progress report in 90 days, but no review." "That's good?" "It is." She looked at her hands briefly, then back at him. "Your presentation helped. 2 of them told me afterward." He didn't know what to say to that, so he said, I just showed them the work. I know, that's what helped. She was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet was the particular weight of a thing they were both aware of, and neither of them was addressing directly. Not now, not yet, but the shape of it was there between them, like a piece of furniture they kept navigating around. He looked at the river through the window. The afternoon light was going orange and low, the way it did in late afternoon in October, and the water caught it in flat, broken pieces. Landon, she said. Yeah. I know what this is costing you. He turned back from the window. She was looking at him directly, the way she did when she'd decided to stop managing something and just say it. The scrutiny, the people in the hall, your old job, the phone calls Frank got. She kept her voice even, but it was the evenness of control, not absence. I know you don't say that stuff. I want you to know I see it. He thought about the right answer and settled for the true one. I made the choice, he said. You didn't draft me. No, but I put the offer in front of you knowing the cost. Vanessa. He waited until she was fully looking at him. I'm not here because I didn't see what it cost. I'm here because I weighed it and came anyway. Don't take that away from me by making it your fault. The sentence landed. He watched it land. Something shifted in her face. Not quite relief, not quite something else. An adjustment. Okay, she said quietly. Okay. He turned back to the whiteboard where the Cascade District project was still waiting. Now let me show you what I'm thinking for the north side engagement gap, because Priya's data tells a story nobody's been reading. She pulled her chair closer to the desk. Outside the window, the river went on doing what rivers do, moving through whatever it passed without being defined by any of it. Below them, 14 floors down, the city was full of people who had opinions about Vanessa Hart and Landon Pierce, and none of those people were in this room. In this room, there was just the work and the map on the whiteboard, and two people sitting close enough that the space between them was a decision they were both, for now, choosing not to make. Patron High. You said part 3. Louis. Viết 4.500 từ liên kết liên mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện. Pha hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Part 3. Lưu ý. Viết 4.000 đến 4.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện. Pha hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước, không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phủ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man, nhân vật không hoàn hảo, hồi thoại tự nhiên, tránh ngôn ngữ văn chương sáo rơi và cụm từ AI điển hình. Viết như nhà văn chuyên nghiệp, không như AI cố gắng nghe sang. Có yếu tố con người, cầm miêu tả qua mượt mà và hoàn hảo, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau, câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document, trì dân bắt buộc, không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyền. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí, không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật, không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Show more 1720, Claude responded. Part 3, the thing they wouldn't name. Part 3, the thing they wouldn't name. 6 weeks into the job, Landon stopped noticing the hallway looks. Not because they stopped, they didn't entirely, but because the work had a way of filling the foreground until everything else receded to the periphery where it belonged. The Cascade District project had been stalled for 8 months under its previous management structure. Within 3 weeks, Landon had restructured the community engagement timeline, brought in 2 local advocacy groups that had been pointedly excluded from earlier planning, and pushed the first phase into active development. Priya had started CCing him on data reports she'd previously filed into folders nobody opened. Dion had stopped double-checking whether Landon actually wanted his honest opinion and started just giving it. The work was real. That mattered more than he'd expected it to. which probably said something about how long he'd been doing real work with fake resources. Vanessa noticed. She didn't say much about it directly. That wasn't her style. But she started stopping by his office with the frequency of someone who had a professional reason to be there and was not examining whether there were other reasons. They had standing Tuesday afternoon check-ins that regularly ran 40 minutes past the scheduled 30. She'd developed the habit of knocking on his open door around 5 o'clock with a question about something specific and leaving 20 minutes later after the conversation had traveled considerably from wherever it started. He noticed, too. He just didn't do anything about it. There were good reasons for that. He had enough self-awareness to know that his judgment in this particular area had not always served him. His marriage had ended partly because he'd been better at understanding other people's needs than he was at saying what he needed himself. And the gap between those two things had grown quietly until it couldn't be bridged. He wasn't in a hurry to make that particular mistake again. And there was Maisie. There was always Maisie. Not as a barrier, not as an excuse, but as the most important fact in his life, the person whose daily happiness was his most non-negotiable responsibility. Whatever he let himself feel or act on, she was part of the calculation. He thought about that while he drove her to school in the mornings. He thought about it when she asked, periodically, with the casual directness of a 7-year-old who had no concept of loaded questions, whether Vanessa was coming for dinner this week. The answer was sometimes yes. Vanessa had started coming to dinner roughly once a week, which had begun as a practical arrangement. They had work to discuss. It was easier to do it outside the office, and had become something else in the incremental way that things become something else. Too gradually to point to a moment, too real to pretend wasn't happening. Maisie treated her presence as a settled fact. That was its own kind of evidence. The settlement offer came on a Tuesday morning in November. Landon found it in his email at 7:14 a.m., before he'd left the house. While Maisie was eating cereal in the kitchen and the radio was playing something low and irrelevant in the background. The message was from a law firm he didn't recognize, Kellner, Walsh and Associates, addressed to him personally, not through Hartwell's HR or legal departments. That was the first signal. The second was the subject line. Confidential communication. Landon Pierce / Hartwell Capital. He read it twice. The offer was structured as a separation incentive, the legal architecture of something that was, in plain terms, being paid to go away. The number attached to it was significant, not life-changing wealth, but meaningful. 18 months of his current Hartwell salary, a non-disclosure agreement covering the nature of his departure and his relationship with Vanessa Hart, and a letter of recommendation from the company's HR director that would describe his tenure in positive terms. In exchange, he would resign his position within 30 days and agree to have no professional contact with Vanessa Hart or Hartwell Capital for a period of 2 years. At the bottom of the letter, in the careful language of legal documents trying to sound reasonable, was a phrase that sat with him longer than the rest. This offer reflects the company's interest in a discreet resolution that protects all parties, including Ms. Hart, from continued public scrutiny. He closed his email, poured his coffee out. It had gone cold, and made a fresh cup. Maisie came into the kitchen carrying her bowl to the sink. "You okay?" she asked. He looked at his 8-year-old daughter, evaluating his face with those sharp, honest eyes. "Yeah," he said. "Just thinking." "About work?" "Sort of." She put her bowl in the sink and reached for her backpack. "Vanessa says you think about work a lot." He paused. "She said that?" "She said it wasn't a bad thing. She said you think about work because you actually care about it, and most people pretend to care, but don't." Maisie hoisted her backpack. "I told her you care about me more than work, and she said obviously." He stood in the kitchen for a moment after she said that, holding his coffee cup. "Let's go," he said. "You'll miss the bell." He didn't call Vanessa from the car. He thought about it. The instinct was there, the same way you reached for something familiar when the ground shifted. But he didn't call her because the letter had been constructed to make him feel like calling her was the problem, and he wasn't going to let that manipulation work on him. He called Marcus instead. Marcus listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Landon valued about him. The patience to hear a thing before forming an opinion about it. When Landon finished reading the relevant portions of the letter over the phone, Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Who sent it?" Marcus asked. Law firm, Kellner, Walsh. I don't know who they represent. Have you asked Vanessa? Not yet. Why not? Landon watched a stoplight turn green and pulled forward. Because the letter specifically frames itself as protecting her, and I want to figure out what I actually think before I put that in front of her. What do you actually think? I think someone on that board decided the 90-day review gave them cover to try this. That Cho's vote was closer than Vanessa knows, or that there's a faction who didn't accept the outcome. Is it someone on the board, or is it Preston? Landon had thought about that. Preston Hale had gone quiet after his second public statement, which, in the world of men who communicated through PR, meant either that he'd moved on or that he'd moved underground. The phrasing in the letter, discreet resolution, continued public scrutiny, had the texture of someone who still had a stake in the narrative. Could be both, Landon said. What are you going to do? Not take it. Obviously. I meant beyond that. Tell Vanessa. Show her the letter. He turned onto the street that would take him back toward downtown, and find out who sent it. He showed her the letter at 10 a.m. He printed it and brought it to her office rather than forwarding it digitally, which was a choice he made consciously. Documents had different weight on paper, and he wanted her to feel the weight of this one. He knocked, came in, closed the door, and put it on her desk without saying anything. She read it. He watched her read it, the way her eyes moved across the page, the particular stillness that came over her face when she was processing something she hadn't anticipated. She read it the way she read contracts, all the way through without expression, then back to the specific clauses that mattered. Then she set it down and looked up. When did this come? This morning, 7:14. Kellner Walsh. She said the name like she was identifying it on a map. They've done work for Warren Finch. Landon knew the name. Warren Finch was one of Hartwell's board members, the one who'd been most vocal in the weeks after the wedding. Conservative, old money, the kind of man who used words like propriety without irony. Is it Finch? Landon asked. I can't prove that, but the framing... She tapped the letter once. This reads like Warren, this phrase about protecting all parties. He's been using that language in board calls. The idea that you're a liability I need to be protected from. Am I? She looked at him. No. I'm asking seriously. I'm answering seriously. She stood up. It was a small motion, but it changed the quality of the room. She was no longer on the receiving end of information. She was deciding something. You've made this department functional for the first time in 3 years. You're the most competent person on this floor on the work that actually matters to this company's community commitments. And Warren Finch has been trying to find a mechanism to remove you since your second week here, because you remind him that this situation exists every time he sees you in the hall. So this is about his comfort. This is about control. His, and possibly Preston's, and a few other people who've decided this narrative is more useful to them than the truth. She looked at the letter again, something working behind her eyes. I need to know if you're thinking about taking it. He met her eyes. No. Good. A pause. I need you to not take it. I know. Not just for the company. I need you to not take it. She said it again, and the repetition carried something different in it than the first time. Something she was saying despite herself, or maybe because of herself. The things she'd been not quite saying for 6 weeks finally taking up enough space that the room couldn't hold both it and the pretense anymore. He looked at her. The office was quiet, real quiet, the kind behind closed doors in the middle of a workday when the rest of the floor was audible only as a faint collective hum. Vanessa, he said, don't. I know what you were going to say, or I know the version of it you've been deciding whether to say for the last month. She picked up the letter. Let me deal with this first. Let me find out who sent it and what it actually means for the board. Then... She stopped, set the letter back down. Then we can have the other conversation. He looked at her for a long moment. Okay, he said. She nodded once. All business again, or as close to it as either of them was going to get. I'll have my lawyer reach out to Kellner Walsh today. Don't respond to the letter. Don't acknowledge receipt. Understood. He He went back to his office. He sat at his desk and looked at the whiteboard with the Northside project notes and the river through the window and thought about what she'd said, the way she'd said it, and thought, we've been standing on the edge of this for weeks, and now we're standing a little closer. He wasn't sure if that was good or terrifying. It was probably both. Next, Vanessa's lawyer identified the party behind the letter within 48 hours. It was, as she'd suspected, a collaboration. Warren Finch had engaged Kellner Walsh, but the communication chain ran through an intermediary who worked for Preston Hale's family office. The two of them hadn't coordinated openly, but they didn't have to. They had overlapping interests. Finch wanted Landon removed from the company to neutralize an ongoing narrative problem, and Preston wanted Vanessa isolated and professionally destabilized enough that the story of the wedding shifted in his favor. The letter itself, Vanessa's lawyer confirmed, was aggressive but likely not actionable unless Landon could demonstrate it constituted workplace interference, which it did, arguably, but proving it would require a level of public exposure that served no one. Vanessa called a closed meeting with the board's executive committee. Landon wasn't in the room for it. He was in his office trying to concentrate on the Cascade District timeline, while Priya gave him updates on material she'd been compiling, and he gave approximately 60% of his attention to what she was saying. The other 40% was aware of the conference room on the other side of the floor, and what was being said inside it, and the version of Vanessa Hart, who was in there right now, controlled and precise, and carrying more than she let show. The meeting lasted 2 hours. She came to his office afterward. She didn't knock this time, just opened the door and stood in the frame and looked at him with an expression that told him the meeting had gone the way a meeting could go when you won the argument, but the war wasn't over. Finch is stepping back from the executive committee, she said. He's staying on the board, but he won't have direct authority over personnel matters anymore. Is that a win? It's a partial win, the kind that creates two smaller problems where there was one large one. She came inside and sat down. He's angry. Quiet angry, which is the kind that doesn't go away. And Preston? Preston is not my board member. Preston is a different category of problem. She rubbed the back of her neck, a small gesture he'd never seen from her before, fatigue breaking through the management. His family's lawyers are going to argue that I created a hostile public environment by failing to keep our separation private. It's a thin argument, but thin arguments filed by expensive lawyers in the right venues can do damage anyway. He thought about that, about the machinery of it, the way resources could be converted into pressure, the patience of people who could afford to wait for the right moment. How much damage? He asked. Reputational. Some board erosion. Maybe an attempt to challenge my controlling share if they can find 2 more allies. She looked at the window. My shares are locked. That's a hard wall for them. But hard walls take time and lawyers and energy to confirm, and meanwhile the company loses focus and the projects suffer. What do you need from me? She turned back from the window. Keep doing exactly what you're doing. The community portfolio is the most defensible part of my record right now. Tangible outcomes, measurable impact, no ambiguity about value. Every solid result that comes out of your department is an argument I can make. Okay. And I need you to be prepared for it to get louder before it gets quiet. He looked at her. Define louder. More press. Possibly targeted stories planted through channels Finch or Preston still have access to. Your name, your past, your divorce, your custody arrangement, anything that can be framed as instability or impropriety. She said it with the flat directness of a warning delivered clearly because the person receiving it deserved clarity, not protection from it. I wanted to tell you that directly. He felt the weight of it, not panic, but the specific gravity of a person understanding the full dimensions of the thing they'd walked into. He thought about Maisie. He always thought about Maisie. Does it reach my daughter? He asked. I don't think so, but I can't promise that. She held his gaze. If it ever goes in that direction, I will shut down everything I have to prevent it. That's not a professional calculation. That's a promise. He believed her. He sat with that for a moment. Okay, he said. She nodded. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The afternoon light was doing the same thing it always did at this hour, going low and orange through the window, turning the river into something that looked more significant than it was. "I haven't been fair to you," she said suddenly. He looked at her. "I brought you into this knowing it would cost you things. I told myself it was because you were the right person for the job. And that's true. But it's not the whole truth." She was looking at her hands on the desk, then back at him. "I wanted you here. Not just professionally, I wanted—" She stopped. Tried again. "You make the room easier to be in. You always have. And I use the job as a way to make that permanent without having to say what I was actually doing." The air in the room changed. He said, "Vanessa, I know. I know the situation. I know the complications." "That's not what I was going to say." She looked at him. "I took the job because I wanted to be here too." He said it simply, without the performance of difficulty, because the truth was cleaner than the performance. "I know what I was walking into. I knew on day one. I'm not here by accident." She was very still. "That doesn't make this simple," she said. "No," he said. "It doesn't. We can't—" She gestured vaguely. "Not now. Not while all of this is—" "I know. Because if it goes wrong, or if people think it's—" "Vanessa." He waited. "I know. I'm not asking for anything right now. I'm just telling you what's true." She looked at him for a long time, long enough that the quality of the silence shifted from tense to something else, something more like the acknowledgement of a thing that didn't need to be resolved tonight, just named. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay." She gathered herself. He watched her do it, the slight squaring of the shoulders, the way she put the thing she'd just said into a different compartment so she could function, and picked up the file she'd brought with her. "The Northside proposal goes to city planning Friday," she said. "I know, it's ready. I want to review it Thursday. I'll have it on your desk by noon." She stood, moved toward the door, stopped at the frame, and looked back at him with the expression he'd been cataloging for 6 weeks, the one he'd kept deciding he was misreading. He wasn't misreading it. "Landon." "Yeah. Thank you for not taking the settlement." He looked at her steadily. "I told you, I weigh things and come anyway." Something in her face loosened just slightly at the edges. Then she was gone, and the room was the ordinary room it had been before, with the whiteboard and the window and the river outside going wherever rivers go. Well, the story that ran the following Wednesday came from a source described as close to Hartwell Capital's board. It was published on a financial news site with enough credibility to make the damage real, not a gossip outlet this time, not a photograph taken through a bush. A reported piece with named sources omitted but quoted, alleging that Landon Pierce's hire at Hartwell had been a personal decision made by Vanessa Hart outside standard HR process, that it had created internal division at the board level, and that it represented a pattern of judgment that several unnamed directors found concerning. The article did not explicitly call them romantically involved. It didn't have to. It let the architecture of the story do that work. The wedding, the house, the job, the board dispute, all laid out in sequence as self-evident evidence of something unspoken. Landon read it at his kitchen table that night after Maisie was in bed. He read it once, put his phone down, and sat in the quiet of the house for a while. Then he picked his phone back up and called Vanessa. She answered on the second ring. He could tell from the sound of her voice that she'd already read it. "You okay?" he asked. "I'll be okay." A pause. "You?" He thought about the question honestly. About his name in print again, the particular sourness of being described in language designed to undermine without quite accusing. About Maisie, asleep down the hall, who would go to school tomorrow morning into a world where this story existed. "I'm tired," he said. "Not giving up tired. Just tired." "I know." Her voice was quieter than her office voice, the one she used when she wasn't managing anything. "Me too." They stayed on the phone without talking for a moment. It should have been awkward, two people in separate houses late at night, not saying anything. But it wasn't. It was just the line between them, steady. "Get some sleep," she said finally. "You too." "Landon." "Yeah." "This is still worth it." She said it simply, without decoration. "All of it. I want you to know that I still think that." He sat in his kitchen in the quiet of his house and thought about that, and the specific weight of a person who said what they meant and meant what they said. Yeah, he said. So do I. He hung up. The house was quiet. Down the hall, Maisie slept through all of it, untroubled, the way children sleep when they trust that the people keeping watch are capable of it. He stayed at the table a while longer before he went to bed. You said, Part 4, Louis. Viết 4.000 đến 4.500 từ liên kết liên mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện, pha hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Part 4, lưu ý. Viết 4.000 đến 4.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện, pha hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ độ kịch tính không viết lan man, nhân vật không hoàn hảo, hội thoại tự nhiên, tránh ngôn ngữ văn chương sáo rơi và cụm từ AI điển hình. Viết như nhà văn chuyên nghiệp, không như AI cố gắng nghe sàng. Có yếu tố con người, cấm miêu tả qua mượt mà và hoàn hảo, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau, câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document, chỉ dẫn bắt buộc, không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyền. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí. Không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật. Không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Show More 1722. Claude responded. Part 4. What it costs to stay. Part 4. What it costs to stay. Day. The Wednesday article had a longer half-life than either of them anticipated. That was the nature of a story with good architecture. It didn't need new information to keep circulating. It just needed to exist in a form that other outlets could reference, reframe, and extend. By the end of the week, 3 more publications had run their own versions, each one adding a slightly different angle. One focused on Hartwell Capital's stock performance in the weeks since the wedding, drawing an implied line between Vanessa's personal decisions and the company's market stability that was correlation dressed up as causation. Another ran a profile of Preston Hale that was ostensibly about his investment portfolio, but spent 4 paragraphs on the canceled wedding in language carefully calibrated to generate sympathy. A third published a quote from an anonymous Hartwell employee describing the internal atmosphere as tense and uncertain, which was true of most corporate environments on any given Tuesday, but read in context as a verdict. Landon tracked it the way you track weather you can't do anything about, aware of it, accounting for it, not letting it become the primary thing. He had work to do. The Cascade District's first phase had broken ground, which was a concrete fact that none of the articles could change. And the City Planning Committee had approved the Northside proposal on Friday, with revisions that were manageable and one committee member's private comment to Sophie that it was the strongest community engagement framework they'd seen submitted in 3 years. He held on to those facts. He needed them. What he couldn't hold on to, and didn't try to, was the pretense that the outside pressure wasn't having an effect on him internally. He was sleeping worse. He'd snapped at Dion once over a minor scheduling mistake, and had to go back and apologize, which Dion had accepted with more grace than the situation required and which had made Landon feel worse rather than better. He'd started checking his phone in the middle of the night, not because he expected anything urgent, but because the low-grade vigilance of a person waiting for the next hit had made uninterrupted sleep feel like a liability. Maisie noticed. She didn't say anything directly. She'd gotten more careful about what she said directly, which was itself a thing Landon noticed and didn't love. But she'd started staying closer to him in the evenings, sitting on the couch next to him instead of across the room, bringing her drawings into the kitchen while he made dinner instead of working in her room. The quiet, physical nearness of a child making sure the person they depended on was still okay. He put his arm around her one evening while they watched television, and she settled against his side with a completeness that hurt his chest a little. "You know things are fine, right?" he said. "I know," she said. You sure? She tilted her head up to look at him with those eyes. Are you? He looked at the television for a moment. Getting there, he said. She went back to watching. Neither of them said anything else about it. The emergency board meeting was called for a Thursday in mid-December. Landon learned about it the same way he learned about most things that happened above his pay grade, second-hand and slightly late. Priya mentioned it Tuesday afternoon with the careful neutrality of someone passing along information they weren't sure they should have, and he thanked her and went to find Vanessa. She was on a call when he knocked. She held up one finger without looking away from her monitor. A minute, and he waited in the hallway until he heard the call end, and she waved him in. You know about Thursday, he said. I was going to tell you today. She looked tired. Not the manageable tiredness of a difficult week, but the deeper variety, the kind that accumulated over months of sustained pressure and didn't respond to a single good night's sleep. Finch moved faster than I expected. He's brought 2 additional board members with him. They're calling for a vote of confidence. On your leadership. On my continued role as CEO. She said it with the flat precision of someone who had been preparing the sentence for a while. The vote of confidence mechanism is in the company charter. He's entitled to call for it. 3 board members is the threshold, and he has 3. What are your numbers? 6 confirmed in my favor. 3 against, including Finch. 4 uncommitted. She pulled a legal pad toward her. I need 7 to survive the vote. Landon did the math. So you need 3 of the 4 uncommitted. Yes. Who are they? She named them. He knew 2 of the 4 well enough to have a read on them. One he'd presented to at the 90-day review, a woman in her 60s named Carol Huang, who had asked the sharpest questions about the community portfolio metrics and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. One he'd had a single brief interaction with at a company function. Huang's persuadable, he said. I think so too. She respects the community work. She's also the kind of person who makes decisions based on long-term company value rather than short-term noise, and the case I can make to her is solid. What's your strategy for the others? That's what I've been working on. She set down the pen, looked at him with the expression she wore when she was about to say something she'd been deciding whether to say. There's a complication. Tell me. Finch's argument to the uncommitted board members isn't primarily about company performance. The financials are defensible. Stock dip was minor and has partially recovered. Community portfolio is generating genuinely positive press in the markets that matter. No material damage to core business operations. She paused. His argument is about me, about my judgment, about whether a CEO who makes personal decisions with professional consequences is someone they can trust to run a $12 billion company. And his evidence for that argument is you. She said it without cruelty, just the fact. Your hire, the circumstances, the perception that I made a significant personnel decision based on personal attachment rather than professional merit. He sat with that for a moment. Is there a version of this where my leaving solves the problem? He asked. She looked at him quickly. I'm asking practically, he said, not rhetorically. If I resign before the vote, clean departure, no drama, does that neutralize Finch's argument enough to move the numbers? Maybe. Probably not enough, and even if it did, she stopped. I'm not going to let that happen. Vanessa, I'm not going to let them use you as the mechanism to control me. That's what this is. Her voice had an edge in it now, not anger exactly, but the force of a person who had found a line and knew exactly where it was. If I let Finch remove you to save my position, I've told everyone in this company, everyone who ever works here, that external pressure is the way to influence my decisions, that I can be managed through the people I care about. She caught herself on the last phrase, didn't take it back. I won't do that. It's not a strategy, it's a principle. The principle might cost you your company. I know. You built that company. I know that too. She looked at him. Would you rather I compromise it? He looked at her, at the set of her jaw and the tiredness around her eyes, and the quality of someone who had thought this through completely, and arrived at a position they intended to hold regardless of what it cost. "No," he said, "I wouldn't." "Then let me fight the vote." He was quiet for a moment. "What do you need from me?" "Exactly what I said in September. Keep doing the work. Let the portfolio speak. And be ready for whatever Finch puts in the room on Thursday, because it won't be clean." Thursday came with the cold, gray insistence of a December morning that had nothing to offer in the way of comfort. Landon was in his office at 7:30, an hour before most of the floor arrived. He'd been there since 7, doing the work he could do, reviewing the Cascade District Phase 2 proposal, signing off on Dion's updated project timeline, reading Priya's latest data compilation with the attention it deserved. The work was still there, still real, indifferent to what was happening on the executive floor 2 levels up. The board meeting started at 9. He didn't know what was being said in that room. He didn't have access to it. He wasn't a board member. He wasn't invited. His role in this was to exist as the professional record that either defended or failed to defend Vanessa's judgment, and all he could do was trust that the record was solid enough. He answered emails, reviewed project budgets, made coffee, talked to Sophie about the Northside Community Liaison schedule for January. Normal work, the texture of a normal morning, while 2 floors up a vote was being taken on whether the person who had opened her door to all of it at 11:47 on a Thursday night would keep the company she'd spent a decade building. Dion appeared in his doorway at 11:15. "You okay?" Dion asked. "Fine. Why?" "Because you've been staring at that budget sheet for 20 minutes and you haven't typed anything." Landon looked at the screen. This was accurate. "I'm fine." Dion lingered. He was 26 and generally too professional to intrude on things above his pay grade, but he also had the quality of someone who didn't leave a room when a person clearly needed company. "For what it's worth," he said, "this department is the best work environment I've had. I just wanted to say that somewhere, in case—" He stopped, shrugged. "Just wanted to say it." Landon looked at him. "Thank you, Dion." "Yeah." He went back to his desk. The morning moved slowly. At 12:40, Vanessa's assistant appeared at his door. Her name was Claire, mid-30s, the efficient and unflappable kind who had been with Vanessa for 4 years and communicated primarily through implication. "Ms. Hart would like to see you," Claire said. "Now, if you're available." The way she said it, the careful neutrality, told him nothing. He closed his laptop and followed her to the elevator. Vanessa was standing at her window when he came in. That was the first signal. She almost never stood at the window. It was a habit she'd once described as too cinematic, too much like a character in a story processing something difficult. She was looking out at the river, and she heard him come in without turning around, and she said his name once. "Landon." He closed the door. Waited. She turned. Her face was composed. It was always composed. But underneath the composure was something he hadn't seen on her before. Not defeat, something closer to the specific exhaustion of a person who had fought hard and lost anyway, and was deciding right now in real time who they were going to be about it. "They voted," she said, 7-6. He felt the number before he understood it. "Against you. Finch got one of the uncommitteds I thought I had. Carol Huang held." She said it without drama, just the account. "The vote removes me as CEO effective end of business Friday. I retain my board seat and my shares. The transition to an interim CEO will be managed by the executive committee." He stood in the room and felt the weight of it settle. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't." She said it quickly, not harshly. "Don't apologize for anything. You didn't do this." "I know. I'm sorry it happened." She looked at him for a moment, then looked away. "I've been thinking about this outcome for 3 weeks, running scenarios, and I still can't—" She stopped, tried again. "It's different when it's real." "I knew that, and it's still different." He walked to where she was standing, not toward her window, but to the chair nearest her, which he pulled out and sat in without asking, so they were level rather than him standing while she stood. It was a small thing, but she noticed it. He could tell by the slight shift in her expression. "What happens now?" he asked. "The interim CEO will likely review all departmental leadership. That probably includes you." She said it with the directness she always used on bad news. I won't have authority to protect your position anymore. I know. So your job might be gone by the end of next week. I know. She looked at him. You're not panicking. What would be the point? Most people panic. I'm not most people. He held her gaze. And I knew when I took this job that it was tied to your ability to keep it. That was always part of the calculation. She looked at him for a long time. The afternoon was gray outside the window, the river flat and colorless under the overcast sky, the city going about its business with the complete indifference of a city toward the specific sorrows occurring inside its buildings. I have to tell you something, she said. Okay. When Finch came to me 3 weeks ago, before he called the vote, he offered me an alternative. She kept her eyes on him. If I terminated you with cause, issued a public statement about maintaining professional boundaries, and agreed to undergo a 60-day performance review, he would withdraw the vote motion. Landon didn't say anything. I told him no, she said. I want you to know the sequence. He offered me the option. I said no before I went back and talked to my lawyers, before I worked the numbers on the uncommitted board members. I said no immediately. He sat with that for a moment. Why are you telling me this now? Because you're about to lose a job you were good at and probably find the next few months difficult, and you deserve to know that I was given a way out that didn't include you, and I didn't take it. She said it plainly. You weighed things and came anyway. I wanted you to know I did the same. He looked at her. The version of Vanessa Hart in the gossip articles, the ruthless CEO, the cold billionaire, the woman who canceled her wedding on a whim, was so far from the person sitting across from him that he sometimes forgot both versions existed in the same world. For what it's worth, he said, you built something real here. The community portfolio, the work the team has been doing. That doesn't disappear because Finch got his vote. It's in the ground. It's in neighborhoods that are better than they were 8 months ago. She was quiet. That matters, he said, even if it doesn't feel like it today. She nodded once, slowly. He could see her filing it, not dismissing it, but putting it somewhere she'd have access to it later, when the immediate weight had shifted enough to let her reach it. I'm going to resign before they can remove you, she said. I'm submitting my formal resignation tonight. I won't give them the satisfaction of managing the transition on their terms. And then what? And then I figure out what comes next. She said it with less certainty than she usually brought to anything, which was somehow more reassuring than if she'd had a plan ready. I have resources. I have skills. She looked at him. I have people I trust. He looked back at her. Yeah, he said. You do. He submitted his own resignation the following morning. Not because he was forced to. The interim CEO hadn't arrived yet. The review hadn't happened. He could have waited. He resigned because staying without Vanessa was staying for the wrong reasons, because the work he cared about was the work they'd built together, and because the version of Hartwell Capital that existed after Thursday's vote was not the company he'd joined. He wrote the letter simply, without bitterness or performance. Thanked the team, noted the community portfolio projects in progress, and requested that the incoming leadership honor the commitments already made to the neighborhoods involved. He copied Priya, Dayan, Sophie, and Raj on the final version, because they'd worked hard and deserved to know directly, rather than through the company grapevine. Dayan knocked on his door an hour after the resignation went to HR. I'm putting together a list of every community organization we have active relationships with, Dayan said. So wherever you land, you have it. Landon looked at him. You don't have to do that. I know. Dayan shrugged with the carefully casual quality of someone hiding how much they meant a thing. The Cascade District Community Board asked me yesterday who was going to be their point of contact going forward. I didn't have an answer. I'd like to have an answer. Landon thought about that for a moment. Give me 2 weeks, he said. For what? He wasn't entirely sure yet, but the shape of something was forming. Not a plan, not yet, just the outline of a direction. Just give me 2 weeks. He called Vanessa that evening from his car, parked outside Maisie's school while he waited for pickup. I resigned this morning, he said when she answered. A pause. You didn't have to do that yet. I know. The interim CEO might have kept you. He might have. I didn't want to find out. She was quiet for a moment. He watched the school doors and the first kids beginning to filter out in their coats and backpacks, the ordinary after-school chaos of children moving in 6 directions at once. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I have an idea," he said, "but I need to talk to you about it in person. Are you free this weekend?" "I'm very free," she said, with the particular dryness of someone who had just lost their primary professional occupation. "I have a great deal of time at my disposal." "Saturday morning," he said. "Come to the house." "Maisie going to be there?" "Maisie is always there." "Good," she said, and the word was unguarded in a way she didn't seem to notice or didn't try to manage. "I'll bring snickerdoodles." He saw Maisie come through the school doors, backpack enormous relative to her size, her head turning until she found his car, her face doing the thing it did when she located him, the small private satisfaction of a child who checked and found what she expected to find. She got in the car, dropped her backpack, started telling him about the elephant dream again, a sequel apparently, with new characters. He pulled out of the school lot and drove home through the December gray, and thought about what he was going to say on Saturday, and thought about the shape of the thing that was forming, and thought about Vanessa saying, "I said no immediately," and meaning it. The city moved past the windows. Maisie's voice filled the car. The story she was telling had no particular point except the pleasure of telling it, which was, when he thought about it, its own kind of answer to a lot of things. He drove on through the cold afternoon, toward home, toward whatever Saturday was going to be. "You said," Part 5, Louis. Viết sao nghìn đến sao nghìn 500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện và hồi thoại tạo thành một câu liền mạch khi ghép lại. Part 5, lưu ý. Viết 6.000 đến 6.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện, pha hồi thoại tạo thành một câu liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước, không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện uyển ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phủ. Phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc, kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết, lan man, có quan điểm cá nhân, thông điệp, bài học, góc nhìn con người. Nhân vật không hoàn hảo, hội thoại tự nhiên, tránh ngôn ngữ văn chương sáo rơi và cụm từ AI điển hình. Viết như nhà văn chuyên nghiệp, không như AI cố gắng nghe sang, có yếu tố con người, cấm miêu tả qua mượt mà và hoàn hảo, phần 5 giải quyết hết vấn đề và kết thúc trọn vẹn câu chuyện. Câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa, lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document, chi dần bắt buộc, không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyền. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí, không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật, không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Show more 1725. Claude responded. Part 5. The life they were meant to build. Part 5. The life they were meant to build. Saturday came in cold and clear, the kind of December morning that had no softness in it, just hard blue sky and frost on the grass and the particular stillness of a neighborhood not yet fully awake. Vanessa arrived at 9:15. She had the snickerdoodles. She also had, Landon noticed, a slightly different quality about her than she'd had all week. Something looser, less braced. The week since Thursday had been its own kind of difficult. The formal resignation, the legal paperwork, the board's press statement that described the transition in corporate language designed to imply mutual agreement, the financial press picking it up and running it through their own particular machine. She'd handled all of it with the controlled efficiency she brought to every crisis, and somewhere in the process of handling it, the thing she'd been holding rigid for months had shifted. He thought maybe losing the thing you'd been fighting to keep sometimes did that, removed the need to hold the position. Maisie met her at the door before he could, wearing her star pajamas still, 2 hours past the age when that was a reasonable outfit choice. "You brought the cookies." "I said I would." "Dad made eggs. Did you eat?" "Not yet." "Okay, come in." Maisie stepped back with the authority of someone operating on home turf. We have orange juice. Vanessa looked at Landon over Maisie's head. He shrugged, which she understood to mean, this is how it goes here. They ate breakfast together, the three of them at the kitchen table, the way they'd been doing on and off for 2 months, with the comfortable lack of ceremony that accumulated over repeated mornings. Maisie was working through a complicated explanation of why her classroom's hamster had been temporarily renamed Gerald II following an administrative incident that appeared to involve a misunderstanding about whose turn it was to take him home for the weekend. Neither Landon nor Vanessa had enough context to fully follow the story, but both of them listened with the attention it apparently deserved. After the dishes, after Maisie had been redirected to her room to achieve some baseline of being dressed, Landon poured 2 more coffees and sat across from Vanessa and said, I want to tell you the idea. She wrapped both hands around her mug. Tell me. He'd been thinking about it since Tuesday. Since the night of the board vote, really, lying awake in the specific way that's productive rather than anxious. The kind of sleeplessness where your mind isn't spinning in circles, but actually building something. He'd thought about the work that mattered, and the communities he'd spent 8 years trying to serve with inadequate tools, and the question of what became possible when the tools weren't inadequate anymore. There are 12 community projects in the Hartwell portfolio, he said. 8 of them are in active development. The community organizations involved in those projects have working relationships with my team, with Dion, Sophie, Priya, me. When the interim CEO comes in and reviews the department, there's no guarantee those relationships survive the transition. There's a real chance several of those projects get deprioritized or restructured in ways that break the commitments already made to those neighborhoods. Vanessa was listening with her full attention. Go on. You have capital, not Hartwell capital. Your personal holdings from 12 years of stock compensation. The proceeds from the share package you negotiated as part of your exit. He watched her face. It's not venture capital scale, but for community development with the right operating model, it's enough to build something real. She was still. You want to start an organization? I want us to start an organization, Community Development Foundation, nonprofit structure, with a for-profit project arm that generates enough revenue to make the whole thing sustainable. Your capital and leadership experience, my project and community relationships, the team that built the Hartwell portfolio, or the parts of it that want to come. He paused. Sophie's already said she'd come. Dion told me to give him 2 weeks. Priya's thinking about it. Vanessa looked at her coffee cup, then at the kitchen window, then back at him. This is a significant risk, she said. Yes. We're both unemployed and publicly associated with a corporate controversy. Donors and partners will hesitate. The first year will be difficult financially and reputationally. Yes. You have a daughter to support. I know that better than anyone. She looked at him steadily. And you still want to do this. I think we're both better at this work than we are at office politics. He said it simply. And I think we've spent enough time working inside structures that didn't fully deserve us. Something moved across her face at that. Not the composed corporate expression, not the managed version. The real one. The one he'd first seen in his kitchen on a Saturday morning standing over a bowl of pancake batter. The one that had nothing performed in it. I think so too, she said. They looked at each other across the kitchen table in the ordinary morning light, with the coffee going slightly cold between them, and neither of them looked away. We should probably also talk about the other thing, he said. Which other thing? He held her gaze. Vanessa. She almost smiled. I know which other thing. I'm stalling. I know you are. She set down her mug, looked at her hands for a moment, then back at him. And whatever careful structure she'd been maintaining around this particular subject was gone. Not dramatically, just quietly absent, like a door finally left open instead of closed. I'm not good at this, she said. The personal part. I'm better at operations and capital allocation than I am at saying what I actually want. I know. I tend to manage things, feelings included. It's not ideal. I know that too. And you're patient in a way that is... She paused. Occasionally, it's a little irritating, actually, because it removes the possibility of blaming you for anything. He did smile at that. Landon. She said his name the way she had in the office 2 weeks ago, with the fullness of someone using a word to mean more than the word. I have been in love with you since approximately the Tuesday afternoon in September, when you told me that the Northside data told a story nobody was reading, and you said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world, and you were right, and I sat in that office afterward and thought, I'm in significant trouble. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, someone's car started in the street. He said, September was a while ago. I'm aware. You could have said something in September. There were approximately 47 logistical complications in September. There are still logistical complications. Fewer, she said, and I'm done letting logistics make my decisions. He looked at her across the table. This woman who had shown up at his door in a wedding dress with dry eyes and bare feet, and the specific courage of someone who had finally stopped living a life arranged for the consumption of other people, who had sat in his kitchen and made pancakes with his daughter and listened to stories about Gerald the hamster with genuine attention, who had said I said no immediately and meant it, and said I need you to not take it and meant that too, and had lost the company she'd built rather than use him as a bargaining chip. September for me too, he said, for what it's worth. She looked at him. Maybe a little before September, son, he admitted. Something in her face did the thing it did, the involuntary, unperformed version, and it was better than any of the controlled expressions he'd been reading for the better part of a year. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Not a dramatic gesture, just his hand over hers on the ordinary kitchen table with the half-drunk coffees between them. She turned her hand over and held his back. Down the hall, Maisie's door opened. They heard her footsteps in the hall, the particular irregular rhythm of a child who had gotten dressed but retained the pajama top by accident or on purpose, the determination of someone who had decided this was an acceptable outcome. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, took in the scene with the focused assessment she applied to things she wanted to understand, and said, Are you two doing the thing where you like each other but don't say it? Landon looked at his daughter. We said it, he told her. Maisie considered this, then nodded once, with the satisfaction of a very small person who had been waiting for an obvious conclusion to be reached by the relevant parties. Okay, she said, and went to the pantry for a snickerdoodle. Potat. The first months were exactly as hard as Vanessa had predicted. They named the organization Groundwork, simple, functional, the kind of name that said what it meant without requiring explanation. Landon handled the operational structure and community relationships. Vanessa handled the capitalization, the legal framework, and the strategic partnerships that would eventually allow the organization to sustain itself without depending entirely on her personal investment. They worked out of the converted ground floor of a building in the Cascade District, a deliberate choice, the kind of geographical statement that cost them some legitimacy in boardrooms and gained them a great deal of it in the neighborhoods where the work actually happened. Sophie came. Dion came. Priya came. After 3 weeks of deliberation and a conversation with Landon that lasted 2 hours and covered everything from equity structures to what the daily commute would look like. Raj, who had been supporting the Hartwell Community Department since before Landon arrived, came on a part-time basis while he finished his graduate degree and shifted to full-time 6 months later. The team was small and worked hard and occasionally drove each other to the edge of functional frustration, which Landon took as a sign of genuine investment rather than a problem to solve. Dion and Sophie disagreed loudly about stakeholder communication strategy for the better part of their first year together, which produced, through the mechanism of productive conflict, a stakeholder communication framework that was better than either of their original positions. Priya built a data infrastructure that was, by any reasonable measure, significantly more sophisticated than what a 6-person nonprofit had any right to possess. Because she could, and because she believed it mattered, and she was right. The first project Groundwork completed on its own. Not a carryover from the Hartwell portfolio, something they'd developed and executed themselves, was a mixed-income housing initiative in the Northside District that Landon had been circling for 8 years across 3 different organizations that had never had the resources to act on it. 42 units. A community center attached. A small business incubator on the ground floor that was fully occupied within 4 months of opening. The ribbon cutting was on a Tuesday morning in October, almost exactly a year after Landon had first sat across from Vanessa in his kitchen and shown her Priya's data on the whiteboard. He stood in front of that building with the cold morning air on his face and the neighborhood around him and thought about all the versions of this moment that hadn't happened, all the organizational dead ends and inadequate budgets and political obstacles that had made this particular kind of work so consistently difficult for so long. He thought about the 8 years of trying to do this with the wrong tools. He thought about a settlement letter he'd deleted without responding to, and a board vote he couldn't attend, and a woman who had said no immediately when offered the clean way out. Vanessa stood beside him, not behind him, not in front, beside, which was where she'd been for the past year in every configuration of the work and the life they were building around it. Maisie was there too, with Kara, bundled into a coat 2 sizes too large because she'd refused the correct one on aesthetic grounds. She was holding a pair of scissors for the ribbon cutting because she had lobbied for this role with the sustained conviction of someone who understood that key moments required correct casting. "Ready?" Landon said. "I've been ready for 10 minutes, Maisie told him. He looked at Vanessa. She was looking at the building, at the solid, unglamorous, completely real fact of it, with an expression he recognized now, the one that had started with the pancakes and developed slowly across a year into something he could read the way you read familiar handwriting. She felt him looking and turned. "Yeah," she said. "Ready." Maisie cut the ribbon with the focus of someone performing surgery. The small crowd assembled for the occasion. Neighbors, community organizers, local officials, the team, applauded with the particular warmth of people who understood exactly how long this had taken and what it had cost to arrive here. Chete. The corporate world's rehabilitation of Vanessa Hart happened on its own schedule, which was the only schedule it was ever going to happen on, and Landon had learned enough to not try to accelerate it. It began modestly with a profile in a regional business journal 14 months after her departure from Hartwell. The piece was straightforward: Groundwork's early results, Vanessa's post-corporate pivot, the community development model they were building. It was written by a journalist who had done actual reporting rather than narrative manufacturing, and the result was something that resembled the true version of events closely enough to be useful. 3 more pieces followed over the following year. A national nonprofit sector publication ran a feature on the Groundwork model that was picked up widely. A business school invited Vanessa to speak on what she described as sustainable community investment and what the audience received partly as a woman talking honestly about what she'd learned from losing something she'd worked a decade to build. She was good at that talk. Landon heard a version of it once, sitting in the back of a university auditorium while the team was in the city for a partner meeting. She was direct about what had happened. Not self-pitying, not martyred, but honest in a way that cost something. She said, "The company wasn't wrong to want stable leadership. I was right that the personnel decision was sound. Both of those things can be true and the outcome can still be what it was." She said, "I learned that the version of success I'd been building toward was mostly about what I could control, and the things that turned out to matter most were the things I couldn't." He sat in the back of that auditorium and thought, she's going to be okay. She already is okay, but she's going to be better. He also thought, she's going to be insufferable when this organization becomes what it's going to become. Not in a bad way. In the way of someone who is always good at the work and is now doing the right work, which produced a specific kind of focused energy that he had learned across 2 years of close proximity to value enormously and occasionally find exhausting. Hartwell Capital, in the meantime, had its own story. The interim CEO, who'd replaced Vanessa, lasted 11 months before the board made a different appointment. Under the new leadership, the community portfolio was restructured in a way that discontinued 2 of the 3 remaining active projects and redirected the budget to a corporate social responsibility communications function that produced more press releases than outcomes. The communities involved noticed, some of them called Groundwork. Warren Finch left the board 18 months after the vote, under circumstances described by the press as a personal decision. Landon noted all of this the way you note weather patterns in a place you no longer live, aware, capable of assessment, not personally invested in the outcome. Preston Hale got married in the spring following the canceled wedding to someone who appeared in the photographs to be genuinely happy about it. Landon saw the headline on a news aggregator one afternoon, read the first sentence, and closed the tab. He didn't mention it to Vanessa. She didn't mention it to him. As far as either of them was concerned, that was the complete extent of its relevance. But the proposal happened in January, 2.5 years after the night she'd knocked on his door. It was not particularly romantic in its staging. They were in the groundwork office at 7 in the evening, later than anyone else had stayed. Dion had left at 6, Sophie at 6:15, Priya at 6:30, with the particular partying energy of someone who had a clear conscience about the hours she'd put in. The office had the specific nighttime quality of a workspace after everyone left. Personal items still out, the whiteboard covered in project notes, the particular lived-in comfort of a place that people actually worked rather than performed working. Vanessa was reviewing the budget projections for the following year. Landon was on the other side of the room finalizing a community partnership agreement, and they were both doing that thing they did where they worked in comfortable parallel, each in their own lane, occasionally saying something relevant and occasionally not, the way people work when they're secure in each other's presence. He looked at her across the room. She was reading something on her screen with the focused attention she brought to numbers. The slight forward tilt, the way she moved her pen across the page without making marks, because she thought better when her hands were doing something. Her hair was slightly loose from where she'd had it earlier. She'd taken off her jacket 2 hours ago and had not noticed it was still on the back of the chair. He thought, I want to look across rooms at her for the rest of my life. He thought it simply, without the anxiety that had attended every version of this feeling in the early months. It was just true the way some things are just true, not because they're perfect, but because they're real, verified by time and proximity, and the specific evidence of knowing someone through the difficult parts. He got up, walked across the office. She heard him coming and looked up from her screen. These side numbers are better than I thought, she said. If we reallocate, Vanessa. She stopped, looked at him properly. There was something in his face she was reading, and he could see her reading it, and she set her pen down. I don't have a ring, he said. I was going to get one, and then I thought that was probably not... He stopped, tried again. I want to marry you. That's the sentence. I've been thinking about how to say it in a way that was appropriately... He made a gesture that communicated the inadequacy of what he was trying to describe. And the only version that felt true was just that one. She looked at him. I want to marry you, he said again. Will you? The office was quiet. The whiteboard behind her had the East Side Project framework on it. The chair with the jacket she'd forgotten was to her left. The budget projection was still on her screen. She said, yes. Not dramatically, not tearfully, just yes. The word with the full weight of a person who meant it without reservation, which was the rarest and best version of the word. He exhaled. Okay, he said. Okay. She stood up, looked at him close range with the expression he had the best access to, the one with nothing managed in it. You really don't have a ring? I wanted to know the answer first. That's very practical of you. I thought so. Also slightly infuriating. You can be infuriated tomorrow. Tonight I'd like to... She kissed him, which resolved the sentence. They told Maisie that weekend. She was 9 now, and had been 9 for 4 months with the self-possession that Landon suspected she had been practicing since considerably earlier. She listened to both of them deliver the news with the solemn attention she gave to things she'd been waiting for. Then she said, So Vanessa's going to live here? We haven't figured out the details yet, Landon said. She should live here, Maisie said. Her apartment has better kitchen stuff, but this house is better. Vanessa looked at Landon. We'll figure it out, Landon said. Can I be in the wedding? We haven't... I think I should be in the wedding, Maisie said. I'm already part of this. She said it simply, without drama, as a statement of observable fact, and neither of them had an answer for it, except that she was completely right. They got married in August. The backyard of Landon's house was, by any objective measure, not large enough for the occasion. This was understood and accepted by everyone in attendance, which included Marcus and his wife, Kara and her 2 kids, Dion and Sophie, and Priya and Raj, the the heads of 6 of the community organizations Groundwork worked with, 3 of the families from the Northside Housing Project who had been insistent about attending when they heard, and a small number of other people who had been present for the difficult parts and had earned the right to be present for this one. The yard was strung with lights that had taken Landon and Marcus most of a Saturday to put up. The food had been partially catered and partially arrived in the form of things people brought because they'd been told not to bring anything and had brought things anyway, which was the particular collective behavior of a group of people who showed love through feeding. Vanessa wore a dress that was nothing like the last one. Simple, cream-colored, the kind of thing that required no management, that moved when she moved and let her be what she was rather than what the occasion demanded. She had done her own hair. She'd told Kara, who had asked, that she'd had enough of other people's ideas about what she was supposed to look like on a day like this. Maisie wore a dress with yellow flowers that she had selected herself over a period of 3 weeks and 2 separate shopping trips, with a conviction about the flowers that had never wavered. She was the one who walked with Vanessa from the back door of the house to the spot where Landon was standing, which had been Maisie's specific and non-negotiable contribution to the proceedings. They walked through the door together, Maisie's hand in Vanessa's, both of them taking the steps down to the yard where everyone was waiting. Landon watched them come. He had not been prepared for how that would feel, watching his daughter walk the woman he loved across the yard with the calm dignity of a 9-year-old who understood exactly what she was doing. He thought he was prepared. He was not prepared. He held it together, more or less. Marcus, standing beside him, said nothing, but there was a quality in his silence that communicated something on the order of, "I've known you for 20 years. I've seen what you've been through, and I'm glad you're here." They stood together in the August afternoon, with the light going gold through the trees and the yard full of people who knew the whole story, and made the ordinary promises that are only ordinary until they're yours. Maisie stood between them through the whole thing, because she had decided she was standing between them and no one had successfully argued against it, which was fine, because she was part of this and she knew it, and both of them knew it, and so did everyone in the yard. When it was done, someone started music, and the food appeared, and the yard became what yards become when the right people are in them, full and warm and slightly too loud, the particular noise of people who are genuinely glad to be together. Maisie vanished into the younger population of the gathering. Marcus gave a toast that was funny and true in equal measure. The woman from the Northside Housing Project, Elena, who had been one of the first tenants and had since become one of Groundwork's most effective community partners, cried during the toast, which she would later attribute to the champagne and which no one believed. Landon stood in his backyard in the August evening and looked at Vanessa talking to Priya across the yard, and thought about the things that had happened between the night she appeared at his door and this moment. He thought about all the nights he'd lain awake in the specific vigilance of a man waiting for the next thing to go wrong, about the settlement letter and the board vote and the Wednesday article and all the machinery that had been pointed at both of them by people with enough resources to make real damage. He thought about the months they'd spent building groundwork out of a converted ground floor with a small team and inadequate furniture and the sustained, unglamorous conviction that the work was worth doing. He thought about what it had cost, the job security, the reputation management, the easier road that had been offered and declined. He thought about how different the calculation looked from this side of it, not because everything had worked out, but because the things they'd lost had turned out to be losses he could live with, and the things they'd built had turned out to be exactly what they'd meant to be. There's a version of this story that would say everything happened for a reason, that the canceled wedding and the scandal and the board vote were all necessary steps toward the correct destination. Landon had never been able to believe that framing, and he didn't believe it now. Bad things happened because people in power made self-serving decisions, not because the universe was arranging pieces on a board. The settlement letter hadn't been a test. It had been a genuine attempt by a frightened man to neutralize a threat. The board vote hadn't been a lesson. It had been an injustice that cost Vanessa something real. What he believed instead was simpler and harder, that the choices you made under pressure revealed what you were actually made of. Not who you wanted to be in theory, but who you turned out to be when it cost something. That the truest version of a person emerged not in the moments of ease, but in the specific gravity of a real decision with real consequences. That Vanessa had chosen him over the clean exit, and he'd chosen her over the safe distance. And both of those choices had been made with open eyes, and the life on the other side of them was the life they'd earned by making them. That was the only version of meaning he trusted. Not destiny, not arrangement. Just people, making choices, and living with what the choices built. Vanessa caught him watching across the yard and held his gaze for a moment. The look that required no performance, that had been developing across 2.5 years into the most fluent thing between them. Then she smiled and went back to her conversation. He picked up his glass and walked into the warmth of his own backyard, into the people gathered in it, toward the evening that was still unfolding. Maisie Pierce would be 12 when she first described Vanessa as her mom, not in a significant moment, in a school form, under the emergency contact section, where the field read parent/guardian. Name, and she wrote Vanessa Pierce without deliberation, the way you write something that has simply been true for long enough that the writing of it is just catching up to the fact. She showed it to Vanessa that evening, not as a declaration, just as something she'd done that day at school. Vanessa looked at the form for a long moment. "Is that okay?" Maisie asked. Vanessa looked at her. "Yeah," she said. "That's okay. I can change it if— Maisie." Vanessa held the form. "That's okay." Maisie nodded once, satisfied, and went to find her book. Vanessa sat at the kitchen table with the form in her hands for a while after that, in the quiet of the late afternoon, not doing anything in particular. When Landon came home and found her there, he asked what was wrong. She handed him the form without explaining. He read it, looked at her. She said, nothing's wrong." He sat down at the table across from her, and they looked at each other in the ordinary kitchen light, in the house that had started with a knock at 11:47 p.m., and had become, in the years between then and now, exactly what neither of them had been looking for, and exactly what both of them had needed. There was nothing tidy about the life they'd built. The organization had its difficult quarters and its strained partnerships and the ongoing friction of doing meaningful work in a world that made meaningful work complicated. Their relationship had its ordinary frustrations. Vanessa's habit of working past midnight and Landon's corresponding frustration, his tendency towards silence when he should talk, and her tendency to talk when what was needed was quiet. The work sometimes followed them home in ways that made the home feel like an extension of the office. Maisie was 12 and had opinions about everything and was correct about more of them than was strictly convenient. None of it was smooth. None of it had ever been smooth. But it was real. And it was theirs. And in the specific arithmetic of a life that turned out to be more than enough. Outside, the city went on doing what cities do. In neighborhoods that groundwork had touched, the North Side units, the Cascade District development, the East Side initiative that had broken ground the previous spring, people were living in spaces that were better than what had been there before, not because the world had suddenly become generous, but because a small team of people had worked hard and cared and kept showing up. That was the other thing Landon believed, the one that had been tested by everything and hadn't broken, that the right work, done consistently by people who meant it, left something in the world that outlasted the difficulty of doing it. Not a monument, not a legacy in the grand sense, just a solid thing that hadn't been there before, built by people who understood that the building was the point. The form was still on the table between them. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, Maisie's voice came from somewhere in the house, reading aloud to herself, which she'd done since she was 5. The particular comfort of a child who had always trusted that stories were worth telling all the way to the end.